All right, hello everybody. I really did never think I'd be making a video like this, specifically with Clemson football. I know I've done a few of these of Clemson basketball in the past. Now they've been slightly more reactionary, closer to the actual game itself. But this one's going to be about Clemson football. And for those of you who do not know, I was on the in the stands for the Clemson NC State game here in Raleigh this past weekend. Really hoping to see some motivation, some hope. Be excited for the future and definitely the rest of the season. Unfortunately, it was the opposite, and it left me in a place where I was just depressed and sad. And that's not to say that oh man, you put too much into sports or anything of that nature, but it was just rather like you go and you spend money to go to a game, and you're really excited about going to the game, and the play on the field is just anything but invigorating, if you will. And so it was a difficult loss. I sounded very, very depressed after the loss. Someone who I'm sure will be watching this, you know who you are, called me, and just to check in on me. And I know I sounded very dejected after then. But the sun rose up on Sunday morning. The sun came up, and you take in a few more. You listen to press conferences. You listen to what the players had to say. You read a few more things. Listen to what coaches have to say on Sunday night. And then Monday rolls around, you have the same thing. You learn more, and the sun rises up again, and you take it in, and you learn, and you'll say, we'll be all right. It'll be all right. And so in this video, I am going to basically assess what I feel like are the issues right now within the Clemson football program and what needs to happen, not in specifics, but is more of an opportunity just to get things off my chest. If we ever want to see the Clemson football program accelerate to the level that many of you who subscribe to this channel know Clemson football can be. So, first thing I want to say is obviously I'm going to be here. I'm not going anywhere. Davo always talks about bandwagon fans and all that crap in his press conferences and whatnot. I'm not going anywhere. Clemson could go 0-12. I'm not going anywhere. I love the Tigers too much to do that. And while this is certainly dejecting, it's certainly frustrating. There's no other way to put it there. That's probably the best word. It is extremely frustrating, as well as depressing. I'm not going anywhere, and I'm gonna be here, and I'm gonna keep making these videos when they're necessary. So if any of you guys are worried about me being a bandwagon, you better squash your concerns now, because I'm not going anywhere. I'm gonna be right here. With that being said, I have every right in the world to criticize the football program for whatever reason I feel like I can. Now, I might be wrong in my criticisms, and everyone has a right to their opinion, and everyone can be wrong about their opinion. But I have a right to criticize. And what I saw this year so far, 8 games in, has just been awful. You look at last year, you finished 10-3 or 11-3 actually with the ACC championship and a New Year's Six bowl appearance. I know lost to Tennessee and all that, but you know, 11-3 ACC championship. Okay, we finally got rid of DJ. DJ's gone. He sucked. I don't care what he does at Oregon State. He sucks, and everyone knows that if they're being honest with themselves. You get Klubnik to come in, and we're looking bright. Now we know there's obviously some issues, and nothing's perfect. But you bring in Garrett Riley, Klubnik comes back. You got Shipley and Maffa back. You look at the schedule ahead of the season, and you're like, well, the hardest games, presumably at the time, are at home in Florida State, North Carolina, and Notre Dame. And I don't think anyone saw what we've seen so far, which is almost a shock to a lot of people. I know it was a surprise to me. I went into that Duke game on Labor Day weekend, Labor Day Monday, thinking, here we go. Like, this is the start of what could be a really, really exciting year, a really promising year. Um, it's been anything but that. It's been a frustrating year. Many of the issues that were present last year have been exacerbated, but in a slightly different way. I think we all agree that last year the team just flat out wasn't good enough to win big games. They just weren't. They just flat out were not good enough. They held on the ball really well. They took care of the ball. They held the ball for long periods of time, but there was no explosiveness. There was no aggressiveness. There was nothing really exciting to watch. This year, that's changed a little bit. Their team has definitely been more explosive in comparison to last year. The team has definitely been more aggressive in the play calling and whatnot. However, there's just been random points of just utter stupidity that have killed this team, such as and that's obviously evidenced by the turnovers, the lack of points in drives, even though Clemson's outgained 7 out of 8 opponents, and oftentimes those yardages are by an extended period, extended amount, if you will, and it's just shocking. It's befuddling, and it's really frustrating because you see Clemson move the ball at most times, and yet has nothing to show for it. And so, where do you go from here? Obviously, the offense has got to improve. The offense has got to improve. I think we all agree the offense has to improve. And for everyone saying, well, and this is specifically Dabo when he goes, well, we're having 3 turnovers a game. We're still outgaining opponents. And, we're just finding ways to lose. What if they give us 3 turnovers, see what happens? Like, we're still a good football team. Look, that works for 1 or 2 games here and there on an off switch when lose a close game, and you outgain the opponent by a sizable amount, and maybe you have 1 or 2 turnovers that cost the game. But when it happens every freaking time, this is who you are. There's nothing about it. Like this is who Clemson is. Clemson is a team that cannot score, has some of the worst play calling I've ever seen in a red zone, and just is committing befuddling errors on offense. And it's just a shame. This team has so much potential, especially on defense. It's evidence there. Defense is playing about as well as they can outside of about 3 plays, obviously off turnovers, and yet the offense has nothing to do to help, can do nothing to help them. When your offense is committing so many turnovers, it's only a matter of time before your defense gives up plays, and it's just going to happen. And it's part of it. It is what it is. But when this has happened every single time, it's no longer, man, this is just, man, this is difficult. This is tough. We gotta come back, and we're gonna commit to the same strategy the same way and expect a different result. It's stupid. Sometimes on a one-off, that's fine, and you stick to your identity and you move forward. This is who Clemson is. Clemson cannot get it done right now. And for lack of a better term, Clemson is just an awful football team right now. And there's no other way to put it. Miami's not that good of a football team. NC State is not a good football team at all. Anyone who watched that game, and I know it was on the CW, and the only people who have that are probably in the grave right now. Anyone who watched that game knows the State is not a good team. It's interesting. Back in the day, in Clemson's heyday, you could always say, Clemson got the best shot of everyone. And it made sense because the Clemson losses back in the day were, usually by 7 points or less, in which teams just played their absolute best. You look at 2017, Syracuse played their best game of the season against Clemson on that Friday night, proceeded to lose the remaining games of their season, finished up with a 4-win team, but played great that night. 2018, obviously Clemson didn't lose, but 2019, LSU played a really good game after the first quarter of that game. Played outstanding. 2020, that Notre Dame 2020 game that Clemson lost. I know that was the COVID year, so obviously you discount that a little bit, but in 2020, that Notre Dame team played extremely well, ran the ball, whatever they wanted to do. Clemson had a backup quarterback, and yet it still went to double overtime. These teams played about as well as they physically could, and it was just enough to get over the hump. Obviously, 2016 as well. I should have mentioned this. Nathan Peterman, who turned out to be an absolute just terrible quarterback in the NFL, had his best game of his life in Death Valley, and Clemson couldn't defend the shuttle pass, and Pitt exploited that to their credit. They won the game, and it was on a game-winning field goal. This year, the losses have not been the same. Clemson has not gotten everyone's best shot in those games. In the Duke game, I don't think Duke played their best football against Clemson at all. They had a drop punt in the first quarter, second quarter or so, which obviously led to a Clemson score. Good teams playing, they're giving you the best shot, are not going to have. Additionally, the play calling was relatively bland for Duke that game, and this is giving all credit to Duke, by the way, because Clemson didn't play well enough to win. But I would say Clemson or Duke has had better games since then where they played better, especially the NC State game. Furthermore, Florida State, you look at that game now in retrospect. I know Clemson played well. That was probably the best game Clemson's played all year, but FSU didn't play their best that game. Their play calling was very bland, and it's very frustrating because Clemson should have won that game, had every chance to win that game, and didn't do it. And you look at it and you say, well, if Clemson had won that game, maybe we're in a different position right now. I know for a fact Miami and State did not give Clemson their best shot. Miami, obviously having the backup quarterback, they were very conservative in their play calling and ran the ball. And to their credit, they moved the ball. But that wasn't Miami's best they had to offer at all. And everyone knows that. And then State played absolutely horribly. I mean, State was limited to like 8, 9 first downs in the game, about 200 yards overall, not rushing, overall, and just played terribly. Their play calling in the fourth quarter sucked. They ran the ball up the middle with 3 straight times and would punt it back. Ran the ball up the middle 3 straight times, punt it back. It was awful play calling. Even before they had the lead, it wasn't good play calling. They had basically their entire game won in 2 plays. It was a quick slant on a stupid coverage assignment by Clemson where you have a 3rd and short and you single your corner up top on their best wide receiver. He runs a quick slant. It's almost impossible to bat down a quick slant. And so therefore you have to make the tackle. Well, it's really hard to tackle their best player in open space if it's one-on-one and you got no one over top to help. You don't do that, they get a 70-yard touchdown. And you can't do stuff like that. That's just bad coaching there. But anyone who watched that game knows that was not State's best performance. And yet it's so frustrating because, under DJ, it was, well, if this team gets a penalty in a series, the series is over. The offense is not coming back from that penalty. This year, it's like, well, as soon as the turnover hits, if the other team scores off of it, the game's over. It just is what it is. Like this team has no ability to explode and come back because we know that the team could not put together 7 to 8 good plays, good aggressive, explosive plays, and put together a touchdown. We just know it won't happen. Either there will be a missed assignment somewhere on a blocking from the O lineman. There'll be a drop pass. There'll be an interception, a fumble. My God, how many fumbles are we going to have this year? Or some combination of such. It's just happened too many times. And so we know there's issues there. Obviously, the offense needs to improve going into next year. Just as vital to the offensive improvement, however, is not just personnel, it's also coaching. I feel like right now, the reason why Clemson is in the spot that they're in currently within the program is because of horrendous coaching hires. This does not include the Garrett Riley hire, which I still believe is a good hire. You got to give him some time to get his players in, but this goes down to more position coaches, the coaches that are spending the most time with the players at that micro level on a day-to-day basis. You look at wide receiver coaches, running back coaches, offensive line coaches, especially, and this is just focusing on the offense. The defense, you could nitpick some things there, but honestly, the defense is playing pretty well. But a lot of the offensive position coaches and the special teams coaches need to be overhauled. Dabo had a shift back in the day when Tony Elliott and Jeff Scott left. Brent Venables obviously left. He lost basically all 3 of his coordinators. And instead of going out and getting new guys like he did when he first took over the job, he started promoting and hiring former players and some of his friends. And that's an issue because these people were not qualified to take the jobs. They didn't have extensive coaching experience, and they were just friends of Dabo. And look, I understand, Dabo makes $11 million a year. We ought to trust him with the direction of the football program. We ought to trust his hires, but it has been clearly evident for the last 3 years that these position coaches are not what they should be. They're not what they're cracked up to be, especially on the O-line, especially in the wide receivers. Clemson's best 3 wide receivers or best wide receiver for the last 3 years have all been freshmen. They've all seemed to regress as they've continued on in their career, Bo Collins being the main one there. And Ngata never turned out to be anything, which was such a shame. He was a highly rated recruit out of California, never turned out to be a thing. And now you have Tyler Brown, who's a great, great wide receiver, but I'm worried he's going to regress in his sophomore year, and he could. Obviously, there's some injuries that play into that too, that kind of force some guys to show up and play. But at the end of the day, the wide receiver game in the offensive line area, those units, especially the coaches within those units, have to improve. You have to go out and get someone new, someone who's going to give you fresh blood. And honestly, I think that relies around Garrett Riley as well. When Dabo is criticized about Garrett Riley and some kind of the lack of offensive production earlier this year, he mentioned that Garrett Riley came in and he's running the Clemson offense. This is not the Garrett Riley offense. This is the Clemson offense. That's scary. That's scary because you don't go out and hire someone new if you want them to run the exact same thing you're doing. You go in and hire someone new, and from the outside, to bring in a new spark, to bring in some longevity to the program, to bring in a new angle on something, right? It's the same thing when Dabo hired Brent Venables in 2012. At the end of the 2011, going into 2012. You remember 2011, Clemson gives up 70 in the Orange Bowl to West Virginia. Dabo fires now Alabama defensive coordinator Kevin Steele, was previously at Auburn. He fires him, goes and gets Brent Venables from Oklahoma. And he didn't hire Brent Venables to come in and run the Clemson defense. He came in, he hired Brent Venables and said, fix it. You're the guy, fix it. Do what you need to do. Get your players, get your position coaches, figure it out. And the same thing needs to happen with Garrett Riley. You see what he did with TCU, with an extremely lesser talented group than what he has right now at Clemson. And he put up great numbers. He put up great metrics. He's going to be a good coach. I have the utmost confidence in the world about that. He needs some time, and Dabo has to let him do what he needs to do. Has to. That could mean, saying, look, I need these guys to coach these positions. It could be, look, I need to pick these guys out of the transfer portal. Maybe I need a big wide receiver that helps the offense go around. Maybe I need a slot receiver who is this metric. Maybe I need a running back. I need a third running back who can catch balls out of the backfield, something that I don't know. I'm not that much of an X and O's guy, but this eventually coaching has to take precedent here. And if we want to see any improvements, ultimately, you got to give Garrett Riley the keys. You have to. You didn't bring him in for nothing. And we have to do whatever we can to make this offense go around. The defense is good enough to compete for the ACC title every year. There's no reason why they can't. They're holding their absolute hardest. There's kind of like a dam that's bursting at the seams. And unfortunately, Clemson's offense is the driver behind the water that's pushing it up against the dam. And the defense is just holding as hard as they can. I know they haven't been perfect, and that is what it is, but they're playing pretty darn well. The offense is awful, though. In order to fix it, we got to have coaching changes. Those coaching changes need to be directed by Garrett Riley, run through Dabo Swinney, and ultimately do whatever we need to do to get that fixed. Along those changes, as I hinted at earlier, I think ultimately a philosophical change needs to be made within the Clemson program. This year, I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, and this year I kind of likened to an experiment. Said, look, come after last year, you come off 11-3. You're going to double down on the philosophy of the program, which up until this point was get kids out of high school, develop them, keep them in the family, and then ultimately they'll play well. Maybe you take lesser talented players, but who believe in Clemson football, who believe in Dabo, and develop them and whatnot. Not use the transfer portal. Don't embrace it at all. Just completely neglect it. All that type of stuff. That was an experiment that was run. And a lot of people are criticizing Dabo for not using the transfer portal for this season. And that I understand why they would do that if they're casuals. But if you look at the reason why he didn't use it, it makes sense. Clemson had a lot of 5th years and 6 years come back this year using their last year of eligibility from COVID, and there just wasn't enough spots available. Now, you can criticize roster management for that. Then that's more than a fair criticism, absolutely. But really, it was a tough situation at that point in time. Next year, I should say, this offseason, coming up in next year, there's no excuses. You fully realize that the experiment that you've run this past year, and I know there's been injuries, every team has injuries and whatnot, but you have to fully recognize that this experiment that you ran This past year has been nothing but a complete failure. It's been awful. And you can't have that and be successful and compete for the top level you want to compete at. You just can't. Um, Everyone knows this season has not lived up to what it should have been. And therefore, you have to do everything you can to return Clemson to the area that it should be. Dabo Swinney gets paid $11 million a year. He didn't get paid $11 million a year to go 4-4 to start out the 2023 season. He didn't. Clemson football has millions and millions of dollars being pumped into the program through facilities, through wellness, through recruiting visits and facility enhancements and food. And, I mean, if you just go to Clemson University, the campus, the main campus in Clemson, South Carolina, there's a football facility the size of a Costco that's dedicated strictly to football, not even all athletics, just strictly football. Hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars have been poured into this program. These investments didn't come for Clemson to go 4-4. These investments are for Clemson to reach the pinnacle of college football at most years and compete at the top level of college football every year. That's why these investments are there. Clemson can't have these performances with these many investments. Ultimately, it's going to drive Clemson bankrupt. You can't have this. You have to get better. You have to perform better, and the results have to show, or else you lose fans, you lose revenue, and you can't pay for these projects. It is a dangerous spot. It is a dangerous spot because you have to perform, and ultimately Clemson's not performing right now. With that, and with that recognition that you have to get better, you have to do everything by any means possible, legally, of course, to improve. And that is probably going to take a philosophical change. If I'm Dabo and I'm looking at this past team going into next year, you got to say, look, we clearly need a big wide receiver one. We need that big 6'5", 6'6" wide receiver who can go up and make those plays on 50-50 balls. They go dominate. They have good hands, kind of like what UNC had this year with Tez Walker. You need someone who can go dominate like that. You probably need a couple new O linemen to pull out of the portal and kind of fill some of those plugs where there's been clear issues. You couple some new offensive linemen with a new offensive line coach, and maybe you improve there, and maybe we see some positivity going into next year as well. On the defense, obviously depth is an issue there with how injury prone some of the defensive linemen seem to be. It's time to maybe pull out a couple more there. And I know the running backs have not been exactly a concern, and they shouldn't have been. They've played relatively well, but if there's depth concerns there, pull some guys out. But the main one being wide receivers and offensive line. You've got to go into the portal and get some elite guys who can go up and win 50-50 balls and dominate there. It's a change that Dabo probably doesn't want to make, but it's a change he's going to have to make. Because, again, there are too many investments in this football program to be 4-4 as we head into November. Way too many. But I don't think people really realize the gravity of the situation. Clemson's in danger of not making a bowl game this year, which would be absolutely catastrophic if for no other reason than the fact that Clemson doesn't get 15 extra practices. People forget that Cade Klubnik only started one game last year, and it was the Orange Bowl. So he's basically a freshman. I know he had practice and whatnot, but when it comes to game time experience, he's basically a true freshman. And he desperately, desperately, desperately needs more time to practice, more time to get stronger, more time in the weight room, things of that nature. He just desperately does. It's obvious. I think everyone on the team needs that, frankly, because the team is relatively young right now. Clemson needs this time over the winter to get better and ultimately have those 15 extra practices in December. It just has to happen. Clemson's got to get to 6 wins. And then as we move forward, ultimately, Clemson's got to make some philosophical changes, many of which I just listed out there, and probably some more that I'm forgetting as I'm recording this right now. But if Clemson wants to reach that pinnacle that we know it can, these foundational changes are going to have to be made. And then, you also have to look at recruiting. Unfortunately, Clemson has fallen complacent in recruiting to a certain extent, where if Clemson can't go get the best targets in particular areas, they fall back on D.W. Daniel High School, which is the local high school there, which is just awful. You get guys who are about as athletic as me going out there and playing on the football field. That can't happen. Now, on a positive note, there are some really, really talented recruits coming into these upcoming classes, specifically the 2024 class, who are, I think could translate immediately. They seem to be bought into the Clemson program. They seem to love Dabo. They seem to be excited about this. Sammy Brown being a big one there. Really exciting, really athletic player coming in. And I'm not going to pretend that I'm a recruiting expert because I'm not. And I don't follow it that in depth. I kind of wait to see the performances on the field. But the point is to say there is some hope in that the players coming in look to be talented. They look to be special. They look to be the part. And that's what we need right now. We need them to look the part. We need them to be legitimate. Because if they're not, Clemson's going to keep doing this year after year after year after year after year. It's just going to happen. And on some off chance that Clemson goes to the SEC and Clemson doesn't make these changes, it's going to be really bad. Because I love to clown on the SEC and whatnot, but the fact of the matter is, SEC competition is going to be the floor of the SEC competition is going to be higher than the floor of the ACC competition. It's just going to be, and these games are going to get substantially worse, especially against top end competition. If Clemson goes to the SEC, you look at having FSU being your main game in the ACC, that goes to Alabama, LSU, Georgia in the SEC. It's just legitimate. It's the real deal. And so if Clemson doesn't make these changes quick, things are going to get bad really quick, and they're going to continue to stay bad. Clemson hasn't quite hit rock bottom yet. We'll see what happens at the remaining 4 games of this year. Obviously, it's tough to play with motivation right now as the season's basically completely lost, but you have to play for pride. If nothing else, just try to go win a football game. I'd heard a rumor there's some locker room issues, and obviously that's understandable, especially with a program that has such high expectations as Clemson, because you have to. I'll go back to the point again. I'll harp on this. I made an Instagram story on my close friends list, which I don't really monitor that much, to be honest with you. But I made that Instagram post and I said, look, this is the locker room of a 4-4 football team. There's too many investments in this football program to be 4-4, and we're not even in November yet. Halloween's tomorrow at the time I'm recording this. We're not into November yet, and Clemson is 500 in football. There are way too many dollars being pushed into this. And Graham Neff knows that. That's the Clemson AD, for those of you who don't know. Graham Neff knows that. And he knows that they've allocated so much money to this. There's so much fan pressure on the football team to excel, because at the end of the day, that's what drives the revenue to promote all other sports. If football declines, all other sports are going to decline as well. It's just natural how it's going to happen. They might not decline in performance, but they're going to decline in support. They're going to decline in revenue, specifically fiscal support there, which obviously not always has an impact on a performance, but definitely can have an impact on performance. And so that's something to keep in mind there as well. Clemson's got to improve. This year's lost. The best thing that we can hope for this year is to make a bowl game, probably the Mayo Bowl. And who doesn't want to go play for some mayonnaise, something of that nature? Try to flush this year down the toilet and start back next year. It's going to take some time. This team can get better. I think we've seen that. This team can improve. It's definitely had some unfair breaks go its way. But at the end of the day, you can only have unfair breaks go your way so many times. At the end of the day, you have to step up and you got to make the plays to win the games. Clemson's not doing that right now. We'll see if Clemson can do something in the last 4 games to give some hope going into the next year. But if ultimately Clemson's got to make some changes, I highlight them in this video. I hope Clemson can make the changes. I'm still going to be around. I look forward to watching the Tigers when I'm a student next year. We'll see what happens. But until then, I'll catch you guys on the next one. I'll probably be making some basketball content. I'm sure Brownell will let me down again. I'm sure it's going to happen. But until then, go Tigers, and I'll see you guys in the next one.